the key arguments that you make in this book is that a lot of the tools that we rely on to understand the world, be it economic forecasting, political polls, financial models, have been failing us. And they're not failing us because they're wrong or they're useless, but because they're incomplete. And that's where anthropology can come in, and that we can use anthropological tools to better understand and contextualize this information to guide us into the future.
The late 20th century was a time when the corporate world and the policymaking world and economics world developed many of these tools. It did so in a way that was often very effective, but all of these tools have a flaw, which is that they're only as good as the inputs, as the stuff you put into your balance sheet, your big data set, your economic model. And it matters where you draw the boundaries. And it matters whether or not you look beyond the boundaries to see the context in which, say, an economic model or balance sheet is actually operating. And if you don't do that, then you are at risk of being like someone who walks through a dark wood at night with a compass. You don't want to throw your compass away. You don't want to get rid of your economic model. But if you just walk through that wood staring down at the model, down at the compass all the time, if you only look at your economic model, you are in danger of walking into a tree or tripping over a tree root. So basically, my book is an appeal for people who are using these models and tools to raise their eyes, look up, look around the world, and look above all else at the context. One of the guiding principles in anthropology is that it pays to embrace culture shock. Human beings are hardwired to run away from culture shock. We don't like being thrown into a weird, different culture. But anthropology argues that actually embracing culture shock and actually deliberately seeking it out is incredibly important because it enables you to basically start living, thinking, walking in the shoes of people who seem different from you. And different can mean somebody at the other side of on the other side of the world in a completely different culture and environment that looks very exotic and weird to you. It can also just mean someone who works in the next door department of you in a company or down the end of the street. And anthropologists believe that if you take that step of immersing yourself in a different type of world, even briefly to get a different point of view, you gain more empathy for others and you get a better sense on how the world works. But you also gain something else, which is a chance to jump out of your own skin, flip the lens and look back at yourself and see yourself as an outsider might more objectively. There's a wonderful phrase in Chinese which says, a fish can't see water. None of us can see the cultural patterns and assumptions and often structures that shape our lives unless we jump out of ourselves and look back. And in particular, that act enables you to not just look at the parts of the world you notice because they're visible or that you hear because they're noisy. It helps you to look at the parts of the world you ignore because they're either the kind of blank spots on your mental map or the stuff that falls between cracks, or they're the areas of silence that no one talks about because it's taboo or boring or dull or geeky. And anthropologists believe that social silence is absolutely key to understanding the world. You have to look at silence as much as noise. I went off to Tajikistan. It's just north of Afghanistan. I lived there for a year up in the high mountain village, essentially studying Tajik marriage rituals and trying to see how that was a key to understanding how Islamic culture and the Soviet communist system interacted. This was still the days of the Soviet Union. I am old. And then I came back to the West, started working for the Financial Times as a journalist, looking at the City of London, looking at the economics profession, then moved to America later on, where I looked at how American tech culture, politics, economics, and business operated. So I flipped the lens, if you like, and tried to look at all this, and also at the media world as an insider outsider. And then last but not least, in the course of doing that, I tried really hard to look at social silences and what people weren't talking about. And time and again, I found that looking at the Western world as an insider outsider, and focusing on social silences was a really good way to not just predict the looming financial crisis. And in fact, one of the reasons I predicted 2008 was very much because of this anthropology mindset, but also to see the looming tech clash and the backlash against Silicon Valley, to see the likelihood of Donald Trump winning the 2016 election, and to see the rise of sustainability and ESG. So, in a sense, my book is an appeal for people to absorb these principles from anthropology. You don't have to be an academic anthropologist to use it, any more than you have to be an academic psychologist to use, say, the insights of Danny Kahneman in your life with Thinking Fast and Slow. But absorbing these principles can be a really powerful way to see more clearly in life.
It can be very difficult to enter communities or spaces where we feel uncomfortable, and asks, do you have any advice on balancing seeking out other viewpoints with managing the stress that can be caused by seeing them? It can feel very overwhelming or upsetting.
Well, I think that's a fantastic question to ask because, you actually are quite right. We are not designed as humans in any way, shape, or form to embrace the weird or different or anything which challenges our worldview. That's just the reality. Any psychologist will tell you that. Um, and I often think that when Donald Trump said, um, that Africa and Haiti were like, excuse my language, shitholes, his words, not mine. Um, Everybody who had a conscience recoiled in horror and said, that's appalling, because it is appalling. And yet, some tiny element of that is inside all of us, this idea of shunning things that seem weird and different and scorning them, because it is psychologically stressful. So what would I suggest? Well, first of all, aside from the obvious thing of having courage, is start small. Don't necessarily go and travel to Tajikistan first. Or if you're a liberal, don't go and put yourself amongst the Trumpists or vice versa. Just try talking to people who are at the end of your street or in the next door department to you with a different training and professional perspective or a different generation, and just try to openly listen and ask them what they think and how they see you, and listen. It can be really instructive. Recognize if you are involved in any type of education whatsoever, even just raising your own kids, the sooner you start teaching people that culture shock is a good thing and should be actually baked into some kind of syllabus or process of growing up, the better. Recognize that actually you can do that to a certain degree, get some flavor of culture shock online if you can't travel, and that's a big issue right now. Going online, immersing yourself in different point of view in terms of, chat rooms, social media sites, etc., can be one way to do that. And then if that all else fails, tell yourself it's worth embracing culture shock for reasons of both fear and greed. Fear, because if you don't do that, if you don't actually flip the lens and ask other people to look at you and try and understand other worlds, you may end up missing some of the biggest risks out there that could hurt you. If Western leaders had basically spent a bit more time finding out where Wuhan was on the map and what was going on there, rather than just assuming it was kind of weird, actually COVID-19 would have never become so bad. Conversely, there's a greed principle. Actually looking at other worlds and different perspectives can deliver amazing insights that will make you more innovative, more creative, and spot opportunities. Tiny example, I tell the story in my book of Nestle and Kit Kat. And Nestle for years was selling this brown biscuit called Kit Kat, which was totally British. At the turn of the century, it noticed that for some reason they couldn't quite understand, sales in Japan in the southern island of Kyushu were surging between December and February each year. Couldn't understand it until they realized that a sort of subculture of teenagers in Japan had started treating Kit Kat as a good luck charm for exams, because Kitoketsu in Japanese sounds like Kit Kat. And that's kind of really weird to Western eyes, and they could have very easily dismissed it, but they didn't. They actually lent into this weird behavior and started marketing Kit Kat as essentially a prayer tool for exam stress for teenagers in Japan. Sounds totally weird to people in America and Europe. Within a few years, 50% of Japanese teenagers were using KitKat as a prayer tool, good luck charm.
How would you apply your anthropology principles to diversity and inclusion issues? Another audience member, Cynthia, asks, do your principles support the idea that the best innovation and advancement come from multidisciplinary groups or teams? So what are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely, I agree. Yes, yes, yes. Basically, there is a growing body of evidence, particularly from the financial world, but not just from the financial world, showing that diverse teams outperform homogenous teams. And the reason is simply that having different points of view doesn't just allow you to see new opportunities and risks, it provides checks and balances. One of the best ways to get checks and balances in any system is to show whatever you've done, bounce your ideas off other people who are different from you, and to get that multi-perspective view. And yes, working with diverse teams can slow processes down, but if you don't have a diversity of opinions in a group, how do you get that kind of checks and balances? That's the thing that everyone should be asking right now. And, to get diversity of opinions, you need to not just listen to different opinions, you need to try and get empathy for different opinions as well. And I'd stress that diversity doesn't just mean box ticking racial diversity or gender diversity. It means different approaches to life and different thoughts, or dare I say it, different generations.
One of the things that you write about in the book is that a lot of companies have started to open themselves up to different viewpoints by including teams of social scientists, by bringing in social scientists to their operations. And these collaborations can sometimes be quite damaging, as in the case of Cambridge Analytica, and they can sometimes be very helpful for organizations to sort of see things that they've been missing, as you write about in the case of General Motors. And this audience member asks, do you have a message for anthropologists about how the discipline might better engage with business or policy making? And I imagine that part of the answer to that question relates to sort of the tribal nature of anthropology and how anthropologists see themselves as a group.
Yeah, absolutely. I would say one, appreciate that there are great ideas happening outside the academic world. It's not the same, it's often anthropology light, but don't just devalue it. Recognize the incredible value of working with other disciplines. Anthropology plus medicine creates amazing medical anthropology. Anthropology plus computer science is absolutely what we need in the future. Recognize that going into the real world involves compromises, big compromises. You may not be willing to make those, and I totally respect that if that's the case. Some people think that working for a big company is like working for the Victorian Empire and is simply morally reprehensible. I respect that. But then recognize that unless you get involved inside systems, you probably aren't going to be in a position to change them if that's what you want to do. And then think about communication styles. Think about how to boil your ideas down into short, sharp, snappy points. Recognize, again, there are compromises. The reality is that doing work with business or with policymakers involves compromises. And it's really up to you to decide whether or not you want to make those compromises or not. In my case, I have. I personally think it's worth it. Realize other people may not. But unless we get more anthropologists into these spheres, it will be very hard to get this unique mindset more widely disseminated.